Okay, abusia. Yabema kwaba so ereba POG Media so. Yeremeko political highway so highway ne de ensem bebre wo so a yen so ya je pene se be me abidwafo no ahu de eko ene de eba. Na abusia yembon ra yensim mu no. Eye lawyer NDC lawyer kese a friend Sasu Tsikata ono ene de ensem bi aba beto do chese oni Mensah ewo court no butu a enye asem keto akra chese wa Mensah eni magu ase sa Mensah na criminality sa oye no ne fraudulent actor oye no eye Sasu Tsikata wa che ne say ono so a very powerful lawyer chese court no abusuya ense wani ense wo kache yense yemre no the course no ye be pese be me abidwafo no be me akọ na yakwakoti ensema e course na ansa na e be kono o ensem kan bi a fa share your comment section like na share ma afofo so ensa into me enke wa ma Mensah wa Lucy court case poto a enye easy cra madam ase.
Let's talk about Sal now. I mean, Sal has been described as the cardinal sin of the eighth part. You have been in court for the last 4 years trying to get justice for the people of Sal. Tell us, how did it happen? How did it happen that the people of Sal were not able to vote in 2020 to get a representation?
On the 6th of December, in the afternoon, evening sometime, the Electoral Commission came out with a statement that the people in those areas cannot vote in the parliamentary election. They can only vote in the presidential election. Those people had been part of the Akuffo constituency, and basically they were prevented from voting in that constituency. Now, when we took the matter up, the Attorney General's position, initially we took it up in the High Court as a human rights matter because their right to vote, they've been deprived of their right to vote, and we are all aware the right to vote is so fundamental in a democracy. We took it up in the High Court. The High Court granted an injunction ex parte based on the urgency of the situation, and the Attorney General went to the Supreme Court to have that injunction set aside based on the argument that we should not have gone before a human rights court, but we should have gone with an election petition before the High Court. And that is the Supreme Court decided that we should have gone by way of an election petition. So we started an election petition. And again, I mean, it's very sad to say some of these things, but it's the truth. Even getting the election petition served on Honorable Amau was a whole issue in itself. A bailiff of the High Court who was actually beaten to pulp, in connection with trying to serve this. But anyway, the main point about why they have not, up till now, been, allowed a correction of the situation is because on the part of the Attorney General, the position was initially taken, and the Attorney General went to Parliament to say this. He said that the people should have voted in the Bawumia constituency because there was a constitutional instrument which had moved them from Akuffo constituency to Bawumia constituency. So according to the Attorney General, the Bawumia constituency results, which led to Honorable Kofi Adams being made an MP, should be set aside, and there should be a rerun of Bawumia, election. Interestingly, again, the Electoral Commission in May this year, in a press release, highlights the fact that it would have been wrong for them to let those voters vote in the Bawumia constituency. So they are now taking a position contrary to what the Attorney General is saying. And at the same time, in the whole High Court, they were maintaining that the CI 128, the constitutional instrument which the Attorney General had been relying on, they were maintaining that that CI should rather have been used for the election and not the CI 95, which is the CI under which these people were part of Hohwe constituency. Now, again, simple reality. CI 95 was, put into force in 2016. The Constitution has a clear provision, Article 47.5, which says that you can review the boundaries of an existing constituency after not less than 7 years, or based on a census result and certain conclusions from a census. Now, 2020 was less than 7 years from 2016 when CI 95 came into force. So there was no basis for trying to replace it with CI 128. That's another reason why CI 128 was clearly not in force. But you have a situation where the Electoral Commission, which has publicly stated in May this year in a press release that CI 128 was not really in force, they continue to rely on that CI in the whole High Court. And because of that, the whole High Court said that the issue about the validity of CI 128 is a matter that is not within the High Court's jurisdiction, which of course again is wrong based on all the decisions of the Supreme Court, which show clearly that the High Court is where these matters have to be determined. And the High Court should apply the Constitution. There was no dispute about the interpretation of Article 47.5 of the Constitution, so it was very clear. The final point in relation to SAL that you ought to be aware of, people who try to justify the situation about SAL rely on the fact that the SAL areas have been moved into the OT region. And because there's, again, a constitutional provision which says that you can't have a constituency which sits in two regions, therefore, they cannot be part of Hohwe constituency, which is in Volta region. But again, that is simply wrong, because when you look at the constitutional instrument 112, which the president used to create the OT region, the language is straightforward and clear. The language of that provision says OT region shall comprise the districts specified in the schedule to this instrument. Now, you go to the schedule, the districts are specified, 1, 2, 3, 8. Then in 9, it says Sancho Kofi, Akuffo, Lolobi, Likpe, traditional areas. Those traditional areas, as the Electoral Commission admitted in the case in Ho, were not a district. And they were not part of a district at that time. They were part of the Hohwe municipality. They were not part of a district in the OT region or anything like that. So basically, just interpreting that constitutional instrument which created OT region, South traditional areas are not part of OT region. That's just clear in the language of the instrument.
All right, because of time, what's the update in getting justice for them?
The update is that there is an appeal to the Court of Appeal. We're trying to get the record settled because, from the point of view of the people of South and the petitioners that I've been representing, it's no longer going to be possible to hold a by-election and correct that obvious, cardinal sin. For the record, it needs to be established that that constituency election was not a valid election. I think for them, it would be at least a measure of justice for that determination to be made in the Court of Appeal.
All right. Finally, on the image of the judiciary, very quickly, the Speaker of Parliament, when he last met the press, said that the executive and the judiciary were working together to frustrate the business of Parliament through some things like what's happening with the anti-gay bill in Parliament and whatnot.
I'm not aware of exactly what the Speaker of Parliament said in relation to, what you are describing, and I don't easily go in for conspiracy theories.
Okay.
So until I know exactly what was being said, I'm not able to comment on that. What I have been insistent on, as you will have heard me emphasize, is that whether it's the executive, whether it's Parliament, whether it's the Supreme Court, we must all be intent on examining their conduct in the light of the Constitution.
All right.
And what the Constitution requires each of them to do. Where they each fall short, they need to be held to account.
But
and they need to be held to account by us, the citizens.
Okay, but what do you make of the president blocking the transition of the bill to him?
Well, again, the rules of Parliament are clear about the processes for bills being sent to the president and so on. If those processes are followed and the president refuses to accept a bill, of course that's not in line with what the Constitution's clear language requires. But as I say, I don't know the circumstances. And, I don't like to speak out of turn about things that I don't have the full facts on.
That's fine.
In terms of the procedure for bills being sent from Parliament to the president, it's very clear-cut. The president doesn't have a discretion when bills have been, passed by Parliament. He doesn't have a discretion whether to accept or not to accept. He has certain powers in terms of whether he wants a reconsideration and how he can refer matters to Council of State and so on and so forth, and even let it go back to the Parliament for them to reconsider. He has those opportunities, but he can't just refuse, in respect of any bill. So I think that this again emphasizes what I have been highlighting, that all of us must have an interest and must really ensure that no arm of government is putting itself above the Constitution.
Okay.
Because that is a road to tyranny and not democracy.
Okay, holding leaders accountable. I've been talking with Mr. Tsikata. We have just about 5 minutes to wrap up the conversation. Let's get a bit personal. It's less than 30 days to the general election. Who are you voting for and why?
Well, since you asked me on national television who I'm voting for, I am voting for John Mahama. And I'm voting for John Mahama because I think the clear failures of the current government and the depths to which we have sunk, not only in terms of our economy, but also in terms of governance, are such that it is really hard to justify voting for somebody who, as vice president, has been so deeply involved, particularly in the issues of. On the other hand, I think that in respect of President Mahama, yes, he has had a previous term in which I think his performance was certainly a lot better than the performance that we've seen over the last 4 years. So I don't have any doubt about that. But, there is more to my decision. But I don't also want people to see it as just voting for my clients in the last election petition, because it's not about that. Frankly, when I'm involved in election petitions, I see them as going beyond even my clients. I see them in terms of the issues for the nation. And I hope it's in that sense that the answer that I've been given will be understood.
Have you forgiven former President Kufuor?
Forgiven? There is nothing to forgive. In fact, you know what? You asked me this as the last question. I say to people that I never had any bitterness or any feeling of great grievance against President Kufuor. He did atrocious things against me personally for whatever reason. He was determined to have me in prison, and I did go to prison, orchestrated by him, on June 18th, 2008. For 5 months, by God's grace, I didn't die in prison. I was evacuated to hospital, and, by God's grace, I'm still alive. Now, he tried the last day of office to offer me a pardon. I rejected it because it was in bad faith. It was clearly in bad faith. He had orchestrated everything. The day that I was being sentenced, the court had not even announced that it was going to give a decision at the end of the trial, because the trial hadn't ended. There was something in the Supreme Court which needed to come back to all that was of no account. It had been set up for me to go to jail that day. I went to jail, and you know what? I actually thank God for that experience. I say to people that going to that Nsawam prison took me to another university, another faculty of law, because I engaged with many of those who were in the prison, and I realized that there were other people suffering injustices, and who didn't have the kind of recourse that I had. I had the opportunity of a lawyer, a close friend of mine from my Legon days, who, gave his all to stand up for my rights. A lot of those people didn't even have. I saw people who'd been in jail for 12 years. Nobody had gone to court on their behalf. So I counted myself privileged. And what is even more exciting, on my first Sunday in that prison at Nsawam, when I went to the church, there was a pastor from Asamankesi who came to preach. And he used as his text Genesis 50:20. That was where Joseph is saying to his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good.
Right.
And then he also used Romans 8:18, basically, whatever suffering it was meant to be for me,
it didn't turn out.
In the end, it didn't turn out like that.
All right.
In the end, and my wife and I always say that we were on a spiritual high during my months in prison.
Okay. All right. We'll use the last few minutes to talk about music.
Okay. Abusia wene ensema apostle ewo political highway so sasu Tsikata ono ena yetene nkano. Abusia wene ensema apostle ewo political highway so yebere abidwafo ase se omoje pene kokoti sa audio e de emai aha POG Media so political trending stories are make waves no yenso ya atum se yere bebremo medamase.